What's your mission in getting out the Palestinian stories?
Yeah, so the mission is really for people to understand that a Palestinian story is not a Palestinian story, it's a story, right? And it's a story that a lot of different people can relate to, even if they're not Palestinian. And so our mission is really to help people understand what a story is, help them share their stories with others, and also help other non-Palestinians relate to Palestinians in the general Palestinian narrative.
How did you get started in storytelling?
I actually got interested in storytelling through podcasting, and that was really my venue. I listened to a lot of podcasts on my commute, and I really saw the power in sort of oral storytelling in that format. And I really thought, hey, we do that already in our culture. We just don't record it, and we just don't produce it in a fun way. And I saw an opportunity to do that with the Palestinian narrative.
Do you hope to give a voice to the voiceless?
I do. I want to make the invisible visible. And I think we can do that through storytelling. I think we can do that through sharing our narrative, sharing our experience, and emphasizing that we're not just victims of things that are happening or perpetrators of violence. We're people with common human experiences, with wonderful value systems as a community. And I hope that that's what the podcast brings to its audience, a sense of community, a sense of value, and a sense of we're all human.
In your household, did you break any molds?
I broke a mold in the sense that I went away for college. That was not something that was typically done. And a lot of my cousins didn't do that, but I did go away to Los Angeles from San Francisco to college. And I went to a school that no one had heard of, and I went to study math, and that wasn't a typical way to go. And then I did something even more drastic, and I moved to Boston to get my doctorate. And in that way, I think I've broken molds in terms of education, but also in terms of distance from home. And I think that also is a part of why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to find that connection to home, even when there's a great distance between me and my home, my family.
Why did you choose math, and why was education important to you?
Well, first, there was never a question. My mom emphasized that the only thing that she could give us as her daughters was education. And she always said, I may not be filled with money, and I may not have a lot to give you when I go, but I want to know that I gave you education. And I want to know that that was a tool that I empowered you with. And I knew from a little girl that school was important.
You have 2 careers now.
Yes.
So by day, you're in the healthcare industry or the health field?
Yeah, I'm actually in academia, so I do public health research. I'm interested in infectious diseases and also interested in Arab American health disparities.
And
by night, I produce and host Palestinians Podcast, and that's become a very interesting night job.
What gave you the idea to start it?
I just realized there was this niche for Palestinian stories that wasn't being told, and I wanted to jump on it. I wanted to take the initiative, hoping that a community of people would follow and help support that.
What do you do as a Palestinian to tell the world that you're proud of your heritage?
As Palestinians in the diaspora, we can't claim to know the Palestinian experience in terms of Palestinians living in Palestine. We can't claim that narrative, and we can't claim that story, but we can show respect for it. And from our place of privilege here as Palestinian Americans or Palestinians living in the diaspora, we can be the advocates and the voices for those who are living in conflict, living in poverty, living in oppression. I'm not sure I know how best to deal with the hurt and the heartache that comes along with this, but I know that exploring my heritage through storytelling has helped. I also know that talking to others and finding community has also helped. Going to things like the Palestine film festivals, or reading Palestinian novels, or even something like exploring a museum like the Arab American National Museum. It helps you realize that you're part of something larger, and in that community you can find hope for the future.
Who did you look up to growing up?
I did idolize my parents, my mother and my father. My father is a very hard worker, as is my mother, but I know that my father spent a great deal of his life trying to make the best for us, and I've taken that work ethic from him, I think. My mother is the most caring soul in the face of the earth, and she's cared for not only us, but for my cousins and for my aunts and my uncles, and I sort of aim to take both of those things, the caring, loving piece and the hardworking piece, and really invest that into my life. I also have very strong female role models in my life from my aunts. I also have very strong teacher figures in my life, teachers, professors. I take from all of those, and I see what's working for each one, and I try to meld them in my own way to become an individual.
What other reasons do we want to tell our stories?
Yeah, I think in today's political climate, it's really important to understand the other. And I think that as Arabs, Muslims, even Arab Christians, we're often labeled as the other without a true understanding of who we are. And storytelling is our way to do that. It's our way to connect with people who might see us as the other, because in reality, storytelling is really about common human values, common human experiences and stories. And that's a value that I see in it.
It humanizes us.
Exactly. I think storytelling does humanize the storyteller, but it also humanizes the listener. And I think people forget that storytelling isn't just about the telling, it's also about the listening. And we need to do a better job of listening to each other and listening to each other's stories, because it creates and it fosters understanding.
Did you have a similar experience, or what do you relate to what's happening with the refugees today?
Yeah, I'm a child of refugees. Both my father and my mother were refugees, Palestinian refugees. My father, as I mentioned in my story, grew up in a Lebanese refugee camp. My mother grew up in Kuwait. So I feel like through them, I've lived the refugee experience, even though I was born and raised in the United States. I felt like a refugee after September 11th. I felt, and I often do feel, that I am discriminated against or stigmatized in some way with the current political climate.
What happened in your home? Did they share stories with you? What did you know about your heritage, and why are you identifying with the Palestinian cause?
It's a good question. As I said in my story, my father never really talked about his experience in the refugee camps. It wasn't something that we really discussed. I knew he grew up in Lebanon and not in Palestine, but I didn't really know the conditions in which he was living. My mother, on the other hand, feels like more of the activist in the family. She wasn't an overt activist, but I do remember sort of having discussions about Palestine when I was young. I remember representing Palestine at cultural heritage days in elementary school, middle school. I remember my mother cooking particular foods. I remember going to debke lessons. So it was something that was intertwined. We went to Arabic school, something that was intertwined in our everyday lives when we were children. It wasn't until I was in high school that I think I understood that it was political to be Palestinian. I always thought it was a cultural thing, and I never really understood the politics, I don't think, until I was a little bit older. But even then, I don't see my existence as I don't want my existence to be inherently political. I think it's a personal existence, but it happens to be political because it's Palestinian. And so it's I grew up in a family that emphasized Palestinian heritage and culture, but de-emphasized the conflict and de-emphasized the politics.